You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your worthless pile of garbage host, Abraham.
And I'm your fines upon fines upon fines host, Shane.
We're terrible today. We're a psychology podcast. We talk about what people do and why they do the things that they do and try and break it down and understand the psychological principles that are underlying these strange, sometimes horrible decisions that we make. And one of those horrible decisions is going to be the central discussion of today's topic. But first, we always like to acknowledge the day on which an episode is published. And the day on which this episode is published is June 21st, 2023. And so let's talk about some things we have to celebrate today.
In continuing with our celebration of our friends from the LGBTQ community, we are celebrating Pride Month.
Yay.
So happy Pride Month, y'all.
Yep. In relation to that, it is World Humanist Day. So we can be humanists by celebrating Pride Month, I think.
Yeah, big fan of that. It's also National Seashell Day. As somebody who lives near the beach, that's a nice thing to celebrate.
Sure. It's National Dog Party Day, meaning both throw a party for your dog and parties thrown by dogs.
Yes, the messiest kinds of parties. It's also National Day of the Gong. That's spelled G-O-N-G, not B-O-N-G, for folks that are mishearing me.
Gillagong. It is also World Music Day. I'm a big fan of that.
Yes, me too. As both of us as musicians, we have to celebrate that. We're obligated to at this point in time. It's also National Day of Indigenous People.
Indeed. And related to that, National Aboriginal Day.
Yes, big fans of that.
Just a shout out, because it is June 21st, in case you didn't know, this is also the summer solstice, which means it's all downhill from here.
I mean, isn't that just kind of a good general rule that it's all downhill from here?
Yeah.
Like right now in this moment when you're listening to it, you are older now than you have ever been and as young as you'll ever be.
And it's going to be the same exact thing by the end of this episode, too.
Yep.
A couple others I almost forgot about. It is Go Skateboarding Day, World Giraffe Day, World Motorcycle Day, National Peaches and Cream Day, Make Music Day, and National Daylight Appreciation Day. Not daylight saving, because that can go to hell. Daylight Appreciation Day.
Yeah, there's a lot of good things happening today. As a matter of fact, it sounds like everything that we're celebrating is pretty great.
It is awesome. Oh, and it's National Smoothie Day. I almost forgot that too.
Oh, yeah. I like that too.
All right, if you appreciate what we're up to today, not necessarily listing holidays, that's not really what we do. We talk about psychology things. And if at the end of this discussion you're like, that was really good, then you should definitely like, subscribe, leave a rating and review, follow us on social media. You reach out and email us, tell us how much you like us. You can join us on Patreon. You can pick up some merch at our merch store. And you can also form a coalition to take down a tyrannical group of horrible people. And you call that coalition Why We Do What We Do. And I'll talk more about how you can support us at the end of this discussion. So as I said, we're talking about worthless pile of garbage coalitions of horrible people, which is to say we're talking about homeowners associations.
Yes. So these are also called community associations or property owners associations. And these are private associations created by real estate developers. The development firms purchase large plots of land to build housing and simultaneously establish a homeowners association, shortened to HOA.
Right.
The HOA is integrated directly into the purchasing agreement for homes built on that land. So when you go buy this land, you are purchasing as part of in order to purchase this, you have to be part of an HOA.
Yes. Yeah. It is automatic membership.
Yes. Now, the Homeowners Association is a communal membership that automatically and involuntarily registers its members upon purchasing the house. When you are buying a house at an HOA, in most places, you cannot opt out. Either you get the house with the HOA or you don't get the house. And they usually kind of there's a pretty clear line with that. And the implication of this, of course, is that there are very few options for people looking to own a home.
Yes, and we should specify for those of you who are already got your typing fingers ready, there are some voluntary HOAs. We know that that's a thing. They do not make up a lot of them, but they do exist.
Right.
And membership in an HOA, and voluntary as it is also not free. Members pay fees ranging from $10 a month to $1,000 a month or even more, with the average being around $200 to $300. And this is according to Investopedia, where I found that information, although I found it corroborated elsewhere.
Yeah.
Now, in exchange for this coerced tithing that is collected from you, the HOA also provides services to the homeowners. And we'll talk about sort of not only the downsides of HOAs, but what people call the benefits of HOAs. And the services that an HOA can provide ranges from maintaining a nearby green space to building and maintaining private roads and sewer systems. If you're in a place with snow, it might do snow removal for you in a very timely fashion because they're only there to plow that particular place. We'll actually get to that because sometimes that doesn't always work out so well. And of course, the service that an HOA will provide is issuing regulations about people's private homes that they own, what they can and can't do with that property.
Yes, we're going to talk about all of those things and really the astonishing power of these entities and what the power that they wield. But we have to talk about a history of HOAs. As you will not be surprised, there's some pretty dark beginnings with this.
Yeah, and we could start with Jim Crow, and we probably should, but we'll actually start with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, more commonly referred to as FDR. Now, setting the scene here, the soldiers are coming back when the 1920s-ish, kind of around that era, soldiers are coming back from the First World War, and the United States is coming out of the Depression. We did an episode about when the Democrats and Republicans switched policies. This is the time of flux that they're sort of crossing over, and FDR was one of the catalysts of that. Anyway, it was already understood at this point in history. Really, everyone kind of was getting the fact that one of the most stable paths to wealth and security was owning land and property. Just having land and property was a thing that would be like, this is the pathway to wealth, possibly beyond almost any other pathway to wealth.
And that's how Scientologists are worth so much today.
Right.
It's like it's all tied up in property. They're land wealthy.
They own a lot of land.
They own a lot of land to the tune of like some $1 billion now. So as part of FDR's New Deal coming out of the Depression, he issues government insured mortgages to avoid foreclosures. So it made sense to appraise the values of certain properties to code for the relative risk of mortgages in the area. So basically he was saying the government's going to own this mortgage. If it defaults or you default on it, then it's okay. The government still owns it essentially, and you can just leave.
Now, there are a lot of people in the United States, citation needed, but like they're not going to go through and appraise every single home. Instead, they're going to group them by area and try and figure out in this sort of district, if you will, or area, how can we qualify the homes that are just in this geographical region, more or less. And they ranked these A to D and used these color-coded maps, largely from red to green, indicating this risk. So red districts were believed to be at the highest risk of property decreasing over time, and green is on the not only is there not risk, but they might actually gain in value over time. And so because of the risk of those red areas, they then did not have to be included in these lending programs, meaning that essentially they said, in these places, the risk is so high that the value is going to decrease that we are not going to insure mortgages there, which means that the interest rates are going to be a lot higher and they're going to be unlikely to sell to people who cannot put down like, a sizable deposit or have some other collateral on hand, right?
Right.
And not coincidentally, and I mean that this is not a coincidence, most of the people in those red areas are black and brown people, indigenous people, and Jewish people.
Weird.
Yeah. They had specifically some pseudoscientific hypotheses at this period in time that posited that the mere presence of brown or dark-skinned people in an area predicted the decrease in the property values for the area. That was it. It was just, if they're there, property values go down inherently. Like that was sort of their hypothesis.
Right.
Put a pin in that kind of justification. We are going to come back to it. And we shouldn't really have to point out at this part of the conversation the idea that the presence of black people reducing property value is just completely not true, except insofar as people choose to manifest this as a reality by creating policies, for example, that make it impossible to get resources to a particular area, or by, of course, only, sort of making it impossible for people to exist in areas where that wouldn't be the case, and therefore forcing them into areas that are less developed or are degrading over time in need of maintenance and that sort of thing. So it is not an inherent value of being a dark-skinned indigenous or Jewish person that will decrease the value of an area, but that was what they believed. But sometimes they manifested that through policies and ideas about those people.
Right. So what Abraham is talking about here is this practice called redlining. And what that meant was it was extremely expensive, if not impossible, for marginalized groups to own a home. So all those groups you were just talking about, it's nearly impossible to actually own anything. So this also means it was a way of both segregating people by race, as well as preventing them from obtaining wealth and force their children to attend poorly funded schools as well. That's a different topic. And also, digital redlining with ISPs and networks is a thing. And Abraham has a specific story about that thing.
Yeah, so this is obviously a more modern version of this, but it does exist, which is that high-speed internet tends to not be available in areas that are sort of in the poverty or like low-income areas. And that it does not mean on the outskirts of town. I'm actually right in the heart of the city that I live in. I mean, not like downtown, but we're very urban where we're currently at. And in our area, just in our little neighborhood and kind of just on like the street that we're on and a couple streets around, it is almost entirely minority groups for this country. And we cannot get like fiber internet or other high-speed internet. We have one service provider that comes here with like terrible rates and service. And so we sort of feel the effects of being digitally redlined in terms of not being able to get access to high-speed internet. They simply say it's just not available. Like they're like, at your address, we cannot get you this. I'm like, but like 2 blocks north or 3 blocks south, you can, just not in my neighborhood.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Moving on from internet, though, going back to our timeline. So we were moving through sort of the New Deal era and the redlining that happened as an outcome of the Green New Deal, where the government was essentially backing these mortgages. In 1968, the Fair Housing Act was meant to curb these extremely discriminatory housing practices that were going on. But at that point, the damage was so systematic and thorough that it may be impossible that we'll ever completely reverse the damage that was done by those policies. And with the civil rights movement in full swing in the 1960s, the legality of redlining was really on the chopping block. And so these acts and these policies were meant to make it so that you could not actually redline districts. And so that sort of meant like, what are we going to do to keep segregating these people?
Right. And so many landowners in cities all across the U.S. had a, quote, gentleman's agreement that they would not rent to Black and brown, indigenous, Jewish, or people of Asian descent. You might think to yourself, that's terrible. And yeah, that's terrible. I mean, there's really no way around it. But some legal covenants blatantly read, quote, no Jews or Asians may use or occupy properties at this address or development, end quote.
Yeah.
This is a very recent history. So like, I want to be clear about that. This isn't like 1700s, 1800s. This is like my parents were alive during this time.
Yeah. This was within a generation ago that this was going on. And they had that directly. Now, as we said, some of them were just understood. This is like handshake agreements. We won't do this. But some of them were directly written down.
Yeah.
But the more subtle discriminatory practices are very difficult to prosecute or rectify, even as laws began to change in favor of trying to build towards some semblance of equality.
And also, let's be honest, like these practices are still going on today.
Oh, yeah. We're getting to that.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. So why are we talking about all this? Specifically redlining in relation to HOAs? Well, because the purpose of redlining and the purpose of HOAs, and there is a linear path from one to the other. There's a direct line, A to B. Like there's no circumventing and kind of like detours or anything like that. It is a direct line from redlining right to HOAs and how HOAs operate.
So at this point in time, we're starting to reach the suburban sprawl that's just exploding across the country in the 1960s and 70s. And after that, of course, it's obviously still going on. And, people are moving out of the cities. There's a lot of reasons for that. It's actually not different from migration in that there's sort of push factors and pull factors for why people move out into these suburb areas, right?
Right.
But these old explicitly racist house covenants were essentially impossible to write or enforce if they were written into those agreements as they were developing these new areas. So they had to find a way to sort of work around that. And as a quick side note, so the house that we're in right now that we're living in was built in 1958. We have the original agreement for building on this house, and it explicitly says, and I meant to find it before we recorded this, but I forgot. It explicitly says in the development agreement of the property agreement for this house, something along the lines of Black or brown people will not be permitted to own or occupy this house unless serving in the role of a servant.
Wow.
That's written down on a government document that we have that came with the house when we purchased it. And so it was like, holy cow, I can't believe that's a thing.
That's wild.
That's 1958. That was just the year before my mom was born.
That's bonkers. I mean, I'm wondering if my house has that. I mean, we have an HOA, so I mean, I'm sure it's somewhere, but I'll have to look in that. I'll have to look and see.
Yeah.
Well, while you process that, because again, that's a whole thing. That's a legal document. While you process that, it's probably worth listening to some ads because that's probably a better palate cleanser than anything we're going to say right now.
In the rare instance that ads were maybe the more preferred thing to listen to, we're bringing you back to our discussion. So again, we're talking about this timeline through the history and this explosion of suburbs, and it's now impossible to write explicitly racist language into the purchasing agreements for houses that were being built. So new racist developers needed a way to keep out the quote unquote undesirables, to keep them out of their neighborhoods without being sued by explicitly putting that language in. And so a private entity that's not under the scrutiny of the government, but with the power to force membership into programs in which they can target anyone at any time with any financial penalty they please, would allow them to maintain the veneer of equal quality while also being able to exercise unchecked tyrannical bigotry and racism. Enter HOAs.
Ah, yes. So check this out. The first proto versions of HOAs could be considered as far, or like we could look back as far as 1905 in Pasadena, California. And these are planned communities meant for wealthy single families. They included deed restrictions that explicitly outlined that non-white and later non-Christian families could not purchase properties in these areas. Super interesting. I'd love for them to be like, hey, do you go to church? I'm like, no. And then they kick you out of the neighborhood. That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder how they check for atheists. But the same groups have already been outlined. We've already kind of talked about that. And this is going back as far as 1905 in California.
Obviously, that was before the Fair Housing Act of 1968. But we're now up to 1948. The Supreme Court ruled that the covenants that these planned communities had written could not be enforced, but private contracts meant that lords could continue to enforce segregation and discrimination until that Fair Housing Act took place. And in 1963, the Federal Housing Association enacted a mortgage insurance policy that explicitly diverted money away from multifamily homes and strongly motivated expansion into suburbs and single-family homes. And so what that meant is in urban areas where there had been a lot of multifamily homes, which often was the way that people who had immigrated to this country or people that had come up from, for example, a past of having maybe a slave as an ancestor who had very, very little wealth to their name, were then trying to work their way up the economic ladder. They would often be in these financial homes because it was a way for them to save money while continuing to, sort of grow and expand. And they basically said, well, we're just not going to fund those anymore. We're going to fund these things into the suburbs. And although it didn't say that we're targeting black and brown people and immigrants, it functionally did that.
Right.
The people who were primarily benefiting from the thing that they diverted money away from was people who are black and brown and indigenous and Jewish and people of Asian descent.
It's a roundabout way of just being super racist, is essentially what happens. Yeah. And you're going to find that a lot in systems where it's like, here's what we'll do. But it's like, this specifically, this policy that you've created directly impacts this group of people. And you know it, but you're not doing anything about it. But the lack of land available for suburban development and the Clean Water Act of 1977, which required stormwater to be detained in new residential developed areas, were justification to start including HOAs into more new developments because they could privately regulate the size and uniformity of houses in development areas and manage the stormwater detainment. So basically these two things together, the expansion, Clean Water Act, together kind of like laid the groundwork for an HOA to exist.
And that's actually a really important feature of part of how they became so popular. These local governments tend to really like HOAs, specifically because the HOA will cover the cost of things that a government's normally responsible for. For example, the HOA might cover local road construction and maintenance, or other public space upkeep, such as parks. I've even seen that they might have pools, playgrounds, something that kind of almost looks like a theme park, although not quite that extravagant.
Yeah.
And all kinds of these spaces of that nature. And those municipalities that have very little money may even mandate that HOAs be written into new developments in order to pass the cost of those services that the government would normally be responsible for to the people who are then purchasing homes in the development through the HOA fees and fines, right? So it's essentially the government is using HOAs to sort of subsidize housing in those areas, even though that's normally government's responsibility. These companies can sort of come in and say, we're just going to take that over for you. And the government's like, great, that's one less cost we have to justify.
Sure.
And then the HOA gets to come in and do whatever they want.
The thought just hit me, like, how many people who live in HOAs who like hate and can't stand socialism? Like the irony of that. Like, you are taking part of your money to pay for things in your neighborhood that benefits everybody in your neighborhood. If that is not the definition of socialism, You know what I mean? Like it's like or at least part of it. Like it's there. Like you're doing it. So like it makes you laugh when people are like they just don't even know.
The spirit is definitely there for sure.
Yeah. So since then, the prevalence of HOAs and new developments has continued to grow and spread like an aggressive, malevolent cancer-made feces. So 53% of owner-occupied households in the United States are currently under HOAs.
Yeah, and so that's just the ones that currently exist, but they're proliferating at an enormous rate because 82% of new homes built in 2021 are in an HOA, which is up from only 40% of new houses being built in HOAs in 1990. 82% of new houses are being built in HOAs. So the remaining 18% is all that's left of new houses being developed to meet the growing population that are people who may not want to be forced to live in an HOA.
Right.
That reality is disappearing extremely quickly.
Yes. So understanding that, there's a lot to unpack here, but let's talk about what kind of power HOAs actually have. Let's start to unpack that because I think it's important to understand what it is that HOAs actually do.
Right. Now, one thing to understand is because they take over services for the local government, they often sort of function as a little local government in a way, except that they're not regulated by the government. They have extremely little or no oversight. And it's essentially a board of people consisting of a couple of people who often live in that neighborhood, although we'll actually get to that. There might be a board, but they may not be the managing people who are managing the HOA. And so in terms of talking about their power, the answer to what can they do, the shorter answer might be what can't they do. But we'll get a quick list of things that they can do anyway.
Yeah, so generally speaking, they have the legal right to set rules and enforce them through punishments such as fines, which homeowners are then legally obligated to pay. If fines weren't bad enough, HOAs can put a lien on someone's mortgage, where the HOA takes ownership of your property until they are paid for the fines that they decided to charge you. So they give you a fine, you don't pay it, they give you lots of fines, you don't pay it, they can say, we're going to take a lien on your house, we're going to own your house until you pay us.
Right. And then they can even foreclose on someone's property, which is they can kick them out and take over when someone owes a debt on that property. And again, the HOA did not buy that house. The HOA did not build that house. The HOA has no actual equity in the house. Like you didn't take the loan out with the HOA. You took it out with whatever your mortgage holder is, right?
Right.
But the HOA then they write into their laws that they can just foreclose on someone's house if they don't pay the fines that the HOA has charged them, which to me is completely insane.
Yeah.
That would be like if someone in your neighborhood was like, I'm going to go ahead and just, I'm going to take your car because I don't like the stickers that you put on it. And then they just take it. And then that's somehow legal. Like,
yeah,
I don't know how that works.
It's wild.
Yeah.
But that's how the laws are written.
That's how, they basically allow them to do that sort of thing. And if HOA does choose to exercise one of those maneuvers, then the homeowner is in a situation where it's really difficult to get out of it. If HOA is putting a lien on their mortgage or foreclosing on it, the homeowner can't just sell their house. They can't even just refinance their house to get the money they need. They're completely trapped financially and legally.
Yes. So that's a lot of power, but HOAs also have the power to set rules about all kinds of things. And we're going to say this is an incomplete list, but check this out. You buy a home in an HOA. This is what they can tell you that you have to do to live in this neighborhood. One, they can dictate how tall your grass is. And we're talking like there are times where people are like within inches.
Yeah.
I've heard of stories where people will bring like a ruler out into a yard and be like, oh, that's too tall.
Yep, absolutely. They can tell you how many and how few trees or shrubs you can have, as well as which kinds and colors of trees and shrubs that you can have. So they might say you have to have a minimum of like a such and such shrub or tree at this size.
Yes.
They also can dictate the inclusion and placement of decorations on and around your house.
If you ever get a chance to, and this is just a mid-show recommendation, if you get a chance to look up Frank the Gargoyle, it's definitely worth looking at that from the perspective of like a homeowner in a battle with somebody in the neighborhood about decoration placements. That's a real joy. I think you all appreciate it.
Okay.
I'll just give you everybody a spoiler. Frank the Gargoyle wins. Okay.
Yeah.
They can also dictate the size of any flags you might fly, how long your car can be in your driveway, how long a guest car can be in your driveway. So they can say, hey, this is parked too long.
Yep. They can tell you how long your garbage can be out at the curb, where it must be stored, and whether or not it can be visible. Even if they can't see it, they can tell you where you can and can't store it.
Uh-huh. They can even dictate whether you can place a shed in your backyard. Doesn't matter. The color of your house, the garage, the shutter, the trims, etc., and whether or not you have shutters or can have shutters.
They can specifically dictate how long your garage door can be open, the color of the lights on your house, any and all features of your front, back, and side yards at all.
Yes, they can also dictate whether you can hang signs in your window. My HOA specifically says no political signs. So there's no political signs in my neighborhood at all, which, is a blessing and a curse. Whether or not and how long a commercial vehicle can be on or near your property, and what kind of mailbox you can and can't have.
But it doesn't even stop there. HOAs don't have to set rules to threaten to impose fines. They can charge you fines if they don't like something you post on social media. If you refuse then to remove the post. They can threaten to simply add a new rule and change it if they don't like something that you're doing, and they just do it.
Mm-hmm. And also, they can legally restrict people from buying houses when those people are using subsidized funds to do so. And this has actually been an effective strategy, a strategic way to target minority families specifically for folks that don't have the means, that are seeking to buy a house, who are able to get subsidized loans or they're able to get all the financing for it. HOAs can still say, no, not in this neighborhood.
There was a specific case that many listeners may have heard about in Texas, in which the rules that they wrote that had to do with these subsidized homes, 93% of the families that were targeted by that specific rule or black and brown families and people of minority descent. I'm like, that is like some surgical precision level segregation that they are enacting.
Yes.
That's almost more effective than gerrymandering. That's like so fine-tuned way of like extracting people who are not white from a particular neighborhood.
Yep, it's awful.
One other quick thing I'll add before we go to add, if you will, is just that, like, obviously we mentioned several things that they do. So like they can offer to do a lot of things, like even including doing the lawn and yard maintenance on your own house. Like that might be a thing that they offer. They might even do things like cleaning gutters. I think I've seen as being part of them. They might actually do the waste management for your garbage. As you said, they might do sewage, the road maintenance, sidewalks, public lighting, all kinds of public spaces, benches, dog parks. Like they might maintain a lot of those things. So, and establish them. And they might otherwise not exist if the HOA hadn't put them there. Obviously, as we said, a lot of these places operate on shoestring budgets if it's a local government anyway. Mm-hmm. Although we've said like all the things that they can dictate about people's houses, which to me is completely insane.
Yeah.
Completely insane. But we'll get there a little bit later. I also think it is worth pointing out, like they do also offer services that part of the reason that people do sometimes like HOAs, sometimes, small number of people, occasionally, but sometimes is because they do those other things too. Now, we have a whole bunch of stories to share with you. And before we do that, take a breath, listen to some ads, and then we'll get into it.
And now that we're back from all of those wonderful, wonderful ads, let's take a second to hear some horror stories about HOAs and how they have been well within their legal rights to operate like this. So I think that's something that we got to be clear about, is that the stories that we're about to share are HOAs that are operating within their legal limits and engaging in these behaviors towards residents of their community. So first, in an HOA in Virginia, the HOAs did not have adequate equipment to manage a snowstorm, and people within the HOA were snowed in for 3 days while the streets only a block away were plowed by the county.
Yep.
So county-owned properties were good. HOA, they were stuck.
Yeah, so as I said, maybe not the best for managing snow. In one place, a person was fined for having her shutters be the wrong color, so then she took her shutters down and then was fined for not having shutters. The fines were daily and ended up being thousands of dollars.
You're going to hear that story several times.
Yeah.
In some HOAs, they can impose additional fees at any time to cover the cost of some project they wish to accomplish. So they can decide that they are going to take on some project in the neighborhood and then require all homeowners to pay more than their already monthly, quarterly, or yearly HOA membership fee. They can say, hey, we got to go fix the pool. Everybody's going to chip in. And so they pull money from everybody and kind of just dictate that out of nowhere.
Yeah, they just sort of pull it. In one HOA, they sent around an auditor to regularly inspect homes for wear and tear or other damage. The HOA sent what the homeowners described as a rude note demanding repairs and threatening fines if those repairs weren't met to the owners whose trim had started to show some of that wear and tear. One person also got in this HOA got a notice of non-compliance and a fee because of dryer lint buildup on their dryer vent.
So wild. Now, immediately after moving in, one HOA came to the family's house at 6 a.m. to tell the homeowners they had chosen the wrong garbage collection company and they needed to cancel and get the right one.
Homeowners in one HOA had a 30-minute window to return their garbage can after the garbage truck came by, or else that they would be fined. And the garbage truck pickup started at 10 a.m. And most people are already at work at that time and were then unable to comply with that rule.
Yeah, now one HOA, kids are not allowed to draw on the sidewalk with sidewalk chalk or else the families are fined.
In one HOA, the HOA had not cashed one of the homeowner's checks, so they charged him late fees, even though he'd been paying on time. And then they also tried to rehome his dog for some reason.
I would be so mad.
Yeah.
There's no way. Now, in one HOA in Washington, D.C., homeowners were punished not for using the wrong color of paint on their house, but for using the wrong brand of paint to paint their house. The HOA threatened to take away their parking spaces.
Yeah, if they didn't change it. A person in a wheelchair had requested a handicap parking space somewhere along the property, and the HOA called them selfish and then refused to comply with the request, which seems to, I think, violate an explicit act that has been passed in the government.
Yeah, that seems like a real problem. Now, one HOA had rules about how many plants you could have in your window and other window decorations. They even got a warning notice, the residents. They got a warning notice for leaving their towel out to dry for more than an hour after swimming in the pool.
Yes, they have these people who are sort of watching like hawks for this sort of thing. One person was fined $400 for quote unquote weeds in their yard. They were back and forth at the HOA, and it turned out that they were talking about the person's shrubs, like their bushes. And then this same HOA refused to correspond with the residents via any means other than mailed letters. They would not accept phone calls, emails, or in-person meetings.
That's so frustrating. Now, in one HOA, a person received letters of violation for, quote, inappropriate fencing when they used a baby gate only when they were outside to keep their kids and dogs from leaving their yard.
One person was in a hospital dying of cancer when the HOA sent a notice requiring them to change their patio curtains to the correct color because their patio curtains were the wrong color. Yeah.
Wow, unbelievable. One person got repeated warnings to remove the well from their property, but they didn't have a well. Turns out a house with the same number but on a different street had a foot-tall ornamental flower pot shaped like a well. The HOA was responding to that, but sending it to the wrong address.
Yep.
Happens sometimes, I guess.
Yeah, for not an actual well. One HOA limited owners to one dog per household and threatened fines and a mortgage lien if people got a second dog.
Wow. A mortgage lien just for having a dog? It's so wild.
Yeah.
Some people moving out of their house got a warning to remove their moving storage pod after less than 1 day of having it at their house to help with the move. So they have it parked, they're packing stuff up, and the HOA is telling them to move right away.
Yeah. And one HOA, the approved color for the house was difficult to get for the garage doors. And what happened was the owners needed to replace their door. They couldn't get it to match their house, so they decided to get it to paint the same color as their house's trim. They were threatened with a mortgage lien if they didn't change their garage door color. But in this instance, the HOA didn't even have rules about garage doors. They just said about, threatening this lien because it didn't match the house. Instead, it matched the house's trim.
Yeah. Now, one family had to leave their wrecked car parked in their driveway while it was being assessed by an insurance company. They notified the HOA of what they were doing and why they were doing it, but still received a fine for illegally parking a car in their driveway.
One family was fined because they were accused of leaving the gate open at the public pool, although they hadn't actually done that. Somebody else had. And the HOA also bizarrely included a note that the husband of the house had been seen at the pool with two women.
What?
That was true. The two women he was with, one was his wife, and the other one, at the same time that they were there, was their neighbor. They were just there hanging out.
So weird.
Yeah.
Now, one person who was recovering from a broken ankle and was unable to mow the lawn was fined for their grass getting too high.
Yep.
They literally couldn't do it.
Homeowners in one HOA had family over for Thanksgiving dinner. All their family parked on their property and in front of their house, so they weren't taking up anyone else's space. But the HOA called the police about illegal parking for the cars, and the families of the house, everybody got parking violation tickets.
Wow. An HOA that had no rules about house color demanded one homeowner change their color because the color they had chosen was, quote, too bright.
Yep. One person received notices of violation every time they left items by their front door. One time their shoes were wet and they let them by their front door to dry because they didn't want to bring them into the house. Groceries, as they would set groceries down and then bring them into the house, they got a warning about that. They left their swimsuits out to dry. They got a warning about that. The items had been cleaned up by the owners so quickly that they didn't even get pictures of the violations, which they normally did in this place, but they sent the warnings anyway.
Ugh. One person got fined when someone else parked in front of their house. They didn't know who, and the HOA told them if it's in front of your house, you get the fine.
Yep. It wasn't even their car. It wasn't anyone they knew's car. They just left it there.
Yeah.
This one was wild. One HOA had rules against having pickup trucks in the neighborhood after 6 p.m. Not like semi trucks, not delivery trucks, just pickup trucks couldn't be in the neighborhood after 6 p.m.
Ugh. Now, one person got in trouble for leaving their RV in their backyard, where it's away from everybody.
One family was fined and threatened with jail time for painting their swing set to match the colors in the trees, the swing set in their backyard that they put up.
A family whose home was destroyed in a fire had to wait 9 months to start rebuilding while the HOA hassled them over minute design details of the new home they were going to build.
So I guess they were just like having to live at a hotel or something the whole time.
Probably, yeah.
One HOA had rules against how large your dog could be. It was no more. So, and this isn't like the Great Pyrenees dogs. Their size limit was 35 pounds. And they even prohibited a Vietnam vet from keeping his support dog because it was over their size criteria.
Unbelievable. One family was prohibited from flying an American flag because it was too big.
There was one instance, this one is like, the HOA did not win this, was kind of fun. There was a political yard sign that someone was allowed to put up, but it was 4 inches larger than the approved size. And they were back and forth with this at the HOA. They ended up going to court, and in the resulting legal battles, eventually the homeowners won, and the legal fees bankrupt the HOA, all because of 4 inches of sign.
You know, sometimes people just, the battles they pick are really bizarre. Yeah. It's really interesting.
That was the hill they chose to die on, and they died there.
That's the hill, and they died there, yeah. One HOA was found to be using more than $300,000 of collective fees to pay for personal expenses.
Yeah, they're literally embezzling money from the community.
Ugh.
One HOA had a rule about walking dogs before 7 a.m., and one of the enforcers chased down the dog walker in a golf cart with flashing lights and sirens to confront the dog walker who was walking on public sidewalks. These weren't even HOA sidewalks. They were public sidewalks. And this is another one where actually the HOA kind of got their comeuppance, or at least this person did, because what happened here is the HOA person called the police. The police got there and was like, this person's walking on public property. You, on the other hand, are blasting a siren that is above the allowed noise level for this ordinance. Also, one of your taillights is out on your golf cart. Also, you're not allowed to be flashing lights here. And so they ended up towing the person's golf cart, which I thought was pretty sweet.
You know, you're hearing all these stories. I'm very grateful because, like, I live in an HOA, but it's fairly chill. There are problems, there are concerns, but, like, I have been sarcastic online, and, like, you know, my wife will be like, "You're gonna get us kicked out of this neighborhood." And luckily, I get along with everybody, so, like, it's fine. But, like, there are some of the things that you pick up on are really petty, and it's really fascinating to kind of watch it all play out, because it's just so, like, there's so many people that have so many big complaints about things that are really not problems. It's really interesting to watch from the inside. I left out the list that we gave you was a fraction of what I found in horror stories. Yes. And I wasn't choosy. I literally just went through and grabbed everyone that I saw until I was like, this is going to be an episode where all we do is tell horror stories about HOAs. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here. Yeah. I wasn't even trying to select the worst ones. Like, they are brutal and petty and terrible. To me, I've always had this question because I've only ever lived in one HOA and I hated it with every fiber of my being. But I've always had this question of what should our rights be, particularly as like homeowners, although HOAs definitely do exist in like condos and apartment buildings and that sort of thing. But what should our rights be in this space? I think it's definitely worth unpacking. Now, beyond the pettiness and the tyranny, the bigger problem here is that HOAs are so prolific, it is nearly impossible to purchase a home that isn't in an HOA if you want to try to avoid that kind of draconian authoritarianism. Now, this means that your options for where you send your kid to school, how far you live from work, those are things that you may be forced to reconcile. So you may have to kind of, like, you know, suck it up and live in an HOA to get those benefits that you're trying to get. And so you kind of have to deal with the good and the bad in that situation. Yeah, I mean, should we have the right to choose where we want to live? Obviously, we can't just live anywhere. Like, I can't live on top in a national park. I can't live on top of a mountain where, like, I can't structurally support a house. There are people who maybe they want to live in a community where they police each other to death. They should be able to have the right to do that sort of thing and live in that little hell swamp of their own creation. But if your choice is down to only 18% of the available new houses that are being built in this country, then that means that you're restricted from all of those things. You can't
You're restricted where you can send your kid to school. You're restricted to how far away you have to live from work. You're restricted to like what access to like groceries and things that you have now, because you're sort of being forced into this shrinking area of development that is the only place as a refuge from getting away from these horrible, terrible people that run these HOAs. And most people don't even want HOAs anyway. It has spilled way past the point of making sense and just proliferating way beyond where people actually want them to exist.
Right. And further, many, if not most of the rules of HOAs are specifically in service of, quote, preserving the quality of the houses for resale, end quote. Now, which again has little or a lot to do with excluding people who can buy houses in a particular area. Remember that certain people were considered to lower the value of houses in an area. Remember that whole thing? So if the goal of the HOA is to preserve the resale value, and that's kind of an embedded systemic thing, then it makes sense that people are getting excluded. But also, many people try to avoid purchasing houses in HOA, so the resale value is already lower. And also, some rules are absolutely ridiculous and couldn't possibly have an effect on a property's value, such as leaving a towel out to dry for more than an hour, anything like that. Those are not resale issues. Those are people with too much time on their hands complaining about things. Also, once you have paid upwards of $100,000, it seems ludicrous that someone else should be able to tell you what to do with that property.
Yeah.
Like, that just seems like a good cutoff.
Yeah. I think that if we look at neighborhoods that don't have HOAs, they are not seeing plummeting house values. So the idea that an HOA preserves a house's value, I think, is just wrong. I don't think that it does that.
Right.
In places where that's not the case, houses continue to maintain their value because location is everything. And if you're in a good location, then your house is going to have good value. And if you upkeep your property, you're going to have better resale value as well. So like there's already built-in incentive to do those sorts of things. And as we said, like, you've already purchased this property. Like, the idea that someone then gets to dictate what you do with your own property and the place where you live, to me, is so far beyond like incredibly asinine. And I did kind of look around to see like how common is this around the world, and there actually are quite a few. Many countries do have HOAs, although what I was looking, the majority of them seem to be in like condos and like apartment complexes and things where it's like sort of grouped housing, if you will, and not necessarily individual homes.
Sure.
Which is a lot of individual homes in the United States are in HOAs. Condos are fairly common to have HOAs as well. And they also reported having similarly draconian and petty squabbles in their HOAs. One example I saw was that in a building where one side of the building gets a lot of sunlight, so the people there were like, it's really hot in our condos, we like to be able to like put up shade to just help. It was this endless debate in the HOA about whether they could put up shades, what color they would be, how much they could spend on them, what size and style they would be. It'd have to be for the entire building, so not just one side was getting shade, even though only one side was getting hit by the sun. Like very impractical, stupid, petty things that they were debating. As just, to me, the whole thing is just so blood boiling to hear about, and like all of these things. And I'm one of those people that I will not live in an HOA. I'm like, if that means I never leave this house, fine. I will not live in an HOA. I'm not going to let someone tell me how tall my grass can be, or what kind of tree I can have, or how long I can park in the driveway.
Sure.
That to me is so far beyond what should be reasonably acceptable for a person to tell me what I can and can't do. Like, there are some things I understand. Don't launch a rocket in your neighborhood, or a rocket propelled grenade. I understand that is a bad idea.
Sure,
I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Like, please don't fire guns at random. Please don't drive at 150 miles an hour through a residential neighborhood.
Yeah.
These are all things that I am perfectly on board with, because those are things that put a lot of other people in danger. But like, please don't like leave your garage door open for more than 5 minutes. That I'm not going to tolerate. Like that is absolutely bat crazy.
It's unreasonable.
Yeah, very unreasonable. I need to take a step back and listen to the soothing sounds of screeching tires on wet pavement or something. Here's some ads. Okay, so can we do something about this horrible nightmare we have found ourselves in?
There's very little we can actually do, which is kind of a problem. You can organize people in your neighborhood to try to dissolve an HOA. It may work. There are a lot of reasons it may not. The thing is a lot of times HOA involves a lot of people and then very few people in power, and trying to get all that together to address that is a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, you can avoid trying to buy a house in an HOA. That's obviously going to be difficult for people because, as we said, They are so ubiquitous that it's really difficult to make that choice. You can move out of your HOA. You can join the board of your HOA and try and change the rules, but this may not work due to management companies, which I'll have to talk about in a second here. But those are some things you can try.
We can also elect officials who can change the rules about HOAs. That will be really nice, but you have to pay attention to local politics and stuff like that. And a lot of people don't want to go through that effort.
Yeah, and there's like no government oversight right now, and there probably should be. So, people who are taking that on as an issue. But here's the thing. Let's say that we get our HOAs under control, the pettiness goes away, and like some of the nonsense fines and like snowball effect fines go away. I would argue that even if they could be toned down and their petty grievances addressed, they're still a terrible idea that should be just completely abolished or largely abolished. For one, there is a practically direct linear path from Jim Crow to HOAs. Like this whole idea was founded on a backbone of segregation and preventing minority people from gaining wealth and status and success. Like that's what they were largely designed to do. They were largely to keep those minority people out. Second, they were largely a way of one of the ways they function is they're a way of a municipality punting their responsibilities to homeowners. The thing is, you pay taxes and then you pay HOA taxes in the forms of fees for the job that your taxes should already be doing. So essentially, it seems like they're just budgeting poorly in these municipalities to try and have people come in that then pay taxes but don't get those services and instead pay more taxes in the form of HOA fees. Right. And that to me is that's wrong. That's stupid. Third, what happens in these HOAs is you run into for-profit companies, and that's where these management companies come in. These are companies whose only job is to go in and help run the HOA, which means that they'll send in an auditor to drive around looking for infractions. And when their bottom line is to make money, then they are going to be looking for infractions. Right. Anything that they can come up with because their bread and butter is charging people fines, right? Their job is to ratchet up fees as quickly as they can because all they want to do is make money. That means that they will change the rule. That means they're going to be filing extremely petty fines about nonsense things, sometimes things that like aren't even actually in violation of the rules, but they kind of spin to make it sound like they are. Like one person, they were like, your driveway isn't clean enough. You have to pay to get it power washed. And if you don't, we're going to fine you. And your lawn ornaments don't meet our decoration code. So you can't have those. And they just fined her without, this happened to someone. And like their fines are daily for every separate infraction, ended up racking it up to $17,000. Right. So like that is a crazy amount of money. And that's what happens when you get these privatized systems that are trying to regulate this. And fourth, forcing people to conform to the set of arbitrary, petty, draconian rules about their own property to me is just completely insane in like the most maddening way that they have the power to do this. And again, it would be one thing if these are voluntary, but most of them are not. You do not get to choose. Your choice is either you don't get to have a house or you have to follow our stupid rules. And to me, that is just not fair. That's just not fair. Like if they want to have their own little thing and police each other to death, then that's fine. Just leave the rest of us out of it because we don't want to play your stupid game. We don't want to be in your stupid club. Go set your own hands on fire somewhere else and stop setting me on fire. So I'm very worked up about this. It is a thing about which I feel very passionately because they are just f***ing people over for no reason other than to be dicks about it and to make money. So that's what I have to say about HOAs.
It's not a cool thing. This episode should be why we don't do this, why we don't do this thing, because it's bad. It's all bad. Like it's not, like I said before, I have not had a personally bad experience, but it is like an extra tax and an extra bill that I've got every month to stay in the house that I'm living in to make sure that my kids go to certain schools and all that. And like it's like it's an unfair thing. Yeah, absolutely. So my main take home point is HOAs, f you. There's no better take home point. Anyway, do you have anything else before we wrap up here? Nope. Nope. I think you covered it. We do have some recommendations. Before I do that, I would like to thank the crew of people. We have fact checking and writing from Shane, Jess, and myself, editing and production by Justin Greenhouse. Thank you all so much for listening. If you would like to support us, if you are also an anti-HOA person, which honestly, all statistics point to the fact that you probably are, and all statistics point to the fact that you probably live in one, and I'm sorry for you for that.
that. If you like to support us, you can join us on Patreon. You get all kinds of access to behind the scenes stuff, extra content, ad-free stuff, whatever. You can also email us directly to tell us how much you hate HOAs at info@wwdpodcast.com. Follow us, like us, do all the things on social media, whatever. You can talk with us there. You pick up some merch at our merch store. And I think that is all the things on that. For the people who have already joined us on Patreon, the wonderful, wonderful list of awesome humans includes Mike M, Megan, Layla, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, the Daily BA, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, and Brian. You guys are amazing. We really appreciate you. You're so much better than an HOA, although that is a low bar to clear. So maybe that was more of an insult than I meant it to be. But I think that's all I have to say for my thanks. Am I missing anything or anything we need to add before we get to our recommendations?
No, I think that covers it.
Perfect. All right. Recommendations it is.
Recommendations.
So the recommendation I'm going to make today is for more reading.
Nice.
So I know everybody likes reading. You all know that I like reading, and I have been reading Night Shift by Stephen King, but I'm not recommending that book specifically. I'm recommending Stephen King short stories.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times people think that like Stephen King is like this horror writer that just writes nothing but these big sprawling epics like It and Dark Tower and The Stand. When the truth is a lot of his stories and a lot of the movies that you might see that are kind of adaptations of his stuff come from a short story somewhere. So like, for example, Salem's Lot is a short book, but there's a movie and a kind of a stuff about that. But if you've ever seen Maximum Overdrive, that's based on a short story he wrote called Trucks. It's only like 10 pages, but like it's really interesting and really fascinating what you'll find and discover in his short story collection. So there's two that I specifically recommend. Everything's Eventual and Night Shift. Those are really good, easy ones to jump into. They're not huge books, but there's some really cool tie-ins and stuff.
Love that. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do need to read me some more Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I am recommending escape rooms. Have you ever done an escape room?
I have. They're so much fun.
Yeah, they're super fun. Most cities have them anymore, at least one. Honestly, I've been to some fairly small cities and was able to find an escape room there. If you've never heard of them or if you've never done them, essentially what it is an hour-long room full of puzzles. And not like puzzles like jigsaw puzzles, but like logic puzzles and that sort of thing, where you are usually trying to go through some narrative. A really common one is like, you are helping the police with some investigation, or you are the police doing some investigation, or someone's trying to kill you and you need to escape. Something that's like a really common theme.
Yeah.
They span all kinds of themes, though. I've seen some wild stuff. Then as you go through the room, there are clues in the room that help you like open locks and open doors and get into secret spaces to find more clues, to open more locks and more doors and codes to then eventually get out of the room. And you try and do that in most cases in less than an hour. And so they're just a lot of fun. You can find them in a lot of places. And I recommend go checking them out. They're a fun time. They can be frustrating if you're someone who does not like working with groups of other people, or if you just don't like puzzles.
Sure.
Or if you don't like dark. A lot of them are dark, which is not my favorite thing.
Yes.
But they're a lot of fun. So I tend to recommend escape rooms.
Strong recommend on that. They're so fun.
Perfect. Well, I think that's all I have. Thank you so much for recording with me today, Shane. Anything else I'm missing?
Nothing on my end.
All right. This is Abraham.
This is Shane.
And we're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.